there's four factors that'll be the reason. The first one is fuel prices. When gasoline gets as high as it is and oil goes to $100 a barrel, it impacts the way people live. It may not impact people at the top, but people who barely make it from paycheck to paycheck know that it doesn't just affect the fuel going to and from work. Everything they reach for on the shelf of their store costs more because it took more money to transport it to that store. So that's the first thing we have to realize is with our dependency upon foreign oil, if we don't begin to reverse that and become energy independent, we well could continue this enslavement to foreign oil and ultimately wreck our economy. Second thing, subprime mortgages. 2 million people today in America risk losing their homes. Now there's culpability on both the lender as well as a lot of borrowers who bought more home than they could. And I commend the President. I think he's handled this right without trying to rush in and do something with taxpayer money to fix this, but certainly to get the parties to make it work. Two other things, health care cost, and the other is education cost. All those factors together, and a lot of people are working harder this year than they worked a year ago, and yet they're not getting ahead. Even if they make more money, they're not making enough money to make up. So the first thing is not raise taxes, cut the marginal tax rates, if anything, and eventually go to a fair tax, which really does stop the penalties on people's productivity.
Mayor Giuliani, you announced plans for a big tax cut yesterday, and you have been running ads that say reducing taxes actually will increase revenues. But the Bipartisan Congressional Budget Office, as well as two chairmen of President Bush's Council of Economic Advisors, all say that tax cuts don't pay for themselves, that in fact they add to the deficit, they don't reduce it. So given that, do you stand by your statement?
Well, the reality is that some tax cuts do add to revenues, other tax cuts don't add to revenues. It depends on the tax cut. And tax cutting has been part of the Bush program, the Reagan program, the Kennedy program, and it always led to significant increase in economic activity. The Club for Growth looked at our plan, which is the biggest tax cut in history, and said that it would be a significant improvement in the economy and it would add to growth in the economy. Now, let me give you an example. If you cut something like the corporate tax at 35%, you bring it down to 30%, you will get more revenues from that cut because our corporate tax is the second highest in the world. If you cut some other tax, you might not get those kinds of revenues. So the question is, what tax are you cutting? Is it anti-competitive? If it is anti-competitive, you're actually going to get more revenues from that tax cut. But that's not the only answer to how you deal with a possible recession. You also have to cut spending as significantly as you cut taxes. You have to be willing to impose cutbacks on each one of the federal agencies, the civilian agencies. I would do that the way I did it as mayor of New York City, the way Ronald Reagan did it as president of the United States. You have to be willing to engage in regulatory reform so that we have a picture here in the United States where we're not regulating businesses out of the country. The main things you have to guard against are overtaxing, overspending, overregulating, and oversuing. And if you can find balance there, you will do the things that are necessary to prop up the economy and to allow us to have a growth economy. It's not just one thing.
Senator McCain is a deficit hawk. I just want to ask you for a 30-second rebuttal on that. Do you believe that tax cuts pay for themselves, or do you believe that they add to the deficit?
I think they stimulate the economy. I think that one of the first things we have to do that I forgot to mention is make these tax cuts permanent, because we got to give some certainty to families and businesses all over America that these tax cuts will not expire and then give them the effect of a tax increase. So I believe they stimulate the economy. But Chris, you've got to cut spending. I'm proud to have been a member of the Reagan Revolution, a foot soldier. And we cut taxes, but Ronald Reagan knew we had to cut spending at the same time. And that was our great failure as a party, is we cut taxes and then we let spending get out of control, and frankly it cost us a great deal. If we had adopted the tax cut package that I had, which entailed spending cuts, then we would be talking about more tax cuts today.
Congressman Paul, do you support a government program to stimulate the economy?
Well, government program is too vague. What kind of a government program? If it's appropriating money and trying to stimulate that way and spend more money, no, that would be the wrong thing to do. But a government program of a reduced tax burden, yes, that would be. Also, to solve this problem, you have to understand why we're in a recession. I believe we're in a recession. I think it's going to get a lot worse. If we continue to do the wrong things that we've done in the past, that it's going to be delayed, just as what happened in the Depression. But you have to understand that overstimulation in an economy by artificially low interest rates by the Federal Reserve is the source of the recession. The recession has been predictable. We just don't know exactly when it'll come. But if you do the wrong thing, it's going to last for a long time. The boom period comes when they just pour out easy credit, and it teaches people to do the wrong things. There's a lot of malinvestment, debt that goes in the wrong directions, consumers do the wrong things, and businessmen do the wrong thing. So we have to attack this and understand the importance of Austrian theory of the business cycle. If you don't, we're going to continue to do this, and the longer you delay the recession, the worse the recession is. And we've delayed a serious recession for a long time. The housing market is already in depression. And a lot of people are hurting. The standard of living in this country is going down. Look at what's happening to the dollar. And what is being offered by the Federal Reserve and Treasury and everybody in Washington? Lower interest rates. Well, lower interest rates is the problem. Artificially low interest rates is the artificial stimulus which causes the bubble, which allows the inevitable recession to come. So what we need to do is deal with monetary policy and not pretend that artificial stimulus by more spending is going to help. That won't do one bit of good.
Senator Thompson, I'd like to get your opinion also on whether or not we're in a recession or headed for one. And as well, you have proposed a big tax plan, but much of it, including, for instance, extending the Bush tax cut, wouldn't help in the short run. Do you support a short-run government stimulus package, or should we just leave the economy alone?
Well, first of all, I need to defend Rudy a little bit on his tax plan because it looks an awful lot like the one I put out a couple of months ago. The government never loses as much revenue as the experts say we're going to. With the 01 and 03 tax cuts in place, we received more revenue into the government in one day in April of this year than ever before in the history of the country. So much for the experts as far as that's concerned. It does stimulate growth and is overall beneficial for the economy. Unemployment is up to 5%. That used to be considered full employment, but we're going in the wrong direction with regard to that. It's not just the subprime market now. It's poured over into the general housing market. Credit is scarce. It's affected the consumer credit market in general. If you're talking about automobile loans or you're talking about credit card fees or anything like that, the money is getting tighter and tighter. We still have a bunch of two-handed economists in Washington. On the one hand, we may go into recession. On the other hand, we may not. Nobody knows. But I think that as we proceed, we need to count on the Fed doing the right thing in terms of the interest rates, and we need to look seriously at whether or not we should do things such as speed up depreciation schedules for businesses, those who create jobs, have deduction for capital expenses instead of having to capitalize them, things of that nature. We had a stimulus package back in 01. It's targeted toward the lower income people. I think that has to be considered somewhere along the line if the economy calls for it. Not today, but perhaps a little later on. But we have to keep in mind a great many lower income people don't pay income taxes to start with. So an income tax rebate like we've tried before would not work. We would all be a lot better off if people knew that these tax cuts of 01 and 03 were not going to expire at the end of 2010, which they're scheduled to do.
Carl Cameron has the next round of questions. Carl?
Thanks, Britt. Good evening, gentlemen. As you all well know, no Republicans ever won the presidency without winning the first in the South Carolina primary. Governor Huckabee, a question for you. Your advisor, Ed Rollins, recently said that the Reagan coalition of economic, social, and national security conservatives is gone, and you've been quoted as saying that you're not running for another Reagan term. Tell us, sir, what part of that coalition's gone, and what has it been replaced by?
Well, I'm not sure anybody said we're not running for a Reagan term. I think I said I wasn't running for this president's third term because each of us have to distinguish ourselves. So let me correct you on that. Not that you would need correcting, Carl, but I wanted to throw that in and make sure you got that right.